Welcome to today's Blueforce Manual Timesheets webinar as part of our Mastering Blueforce series, this one for the week of March the 6th. Now, as we do with all of our sessions, we do currently have everyone muted. So if there are any questions, any concerns that should be raised during our call today, please type in your question on the little questions area on your control panel, and we'll be happy to address that at the appropriate time. Now, just a quick reminder for everybody, these webinars are offered every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central, and they are partly here for the simple fact that we want to give everyone the knowledge needed and the critical tools needed to easily and efficiently master the Blueforce system. Now, all webinars are recorded, so I'll make these available via the Gateway, ISS Gateway SharePoint site, as well as on YouTube following today's call, as well as the documentation that I'll be referring to throughout today's webinar will also be posted to the ISS Gateway, as well as another site called Google Drive, so you can download that after the session. Now, I went ahead and included the links here so when you download this document, you do have the links. These are the links that will help you going forward. We always be able to see the recorded webinars, documentation, etc. And once again, we post everything out there, so any webinar we've done in the past you may have missed or want to see it again, you're more than welcome to go out there and view that. Now, for our session specifically today, as far as it deals with manual timesheets, we're going to break it up into a couple different sections. The first section is just a quick review of the Blueforce payroll process. I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and everyone understands what the payroll process is and the requirements are. After that, I'm going to go through a quick piece on payroll readiness, some of the things that we can do as the editor, the submitter, and the approver to make sure that our payroll is ready to go. And then lastly, we're going to discuss how to handle payroll adjustments, and that is the discussion where we actually look at creating a manual timesheet. So I'm going to start off today's webinar with a general question that I sent everyone out on Monday, and that general question was, are you producing error-free payrolls? And I will say there's a few of you out there that have done excellent on that for that question. And the second question is your team consistently getting paid correctly and on time? So these are two key themes that we're going to keep in mind as we talk about the need to make sure we have our payrolls ready and in check when it comes time to do our payrolls, our payroll process. And secondly, obviously, to keep in mind when we, if we're doing everything correctly, obviously we won't have to do those manual timesheets, basically those adjustments kind of after the fact, also referred to as interims. So just a quick introduction to the Blueforce payroll process. So as a quick overview, I want to make sure everyone understands that all of our employees are required to use one of the 4 time collection methods. They should either be using the Walter time clock device, phone-in, which is our call-in system, mobile punch, which is our smartphone app, or web punch, which is a kind of a, I guess, a link, an internet link that's provided for you so you can clock in off of your computer. Now, the supervisor or manager, which is typically your editor and submitter, is supposed to be reviewing the employee punches daily. So that's part of our daily time review. And for those that have been on ePay with almost 2 years with us now, we've stressed this for day one that we want you to go in there and make sure you're doing your daily time reviews. Managers, typically are the submitter role, will actually review the time for the pay week and submit. So if you have a weekly payroll, you know it's pretty cut dry, you're done, weekly payroll. If you have a bi-weekly payroll, as a submitter, it's still encouraged to go through, review your pay week, submit that time, focus on the next week. Once that's done, submit the time as well. As a submitter, you can submit after the pay week is ended. So, you know, Friday is where our pay weeks end. You can then go in anytime after Friday and hit submit. The admin, or possibly a different manager then, is the approver type role, and they then review the time once more. They give it one quick once over, and then approve. And approving is really the point of no return, and that's kind of want to make everyone aware that once you approve and you go on and let your corporate payroll contact know that it's time that you're done, you're ready for them to process payroll, there is a very small window there that you have to retract that approval. So that's why I want to say, once you click on approve, consider that your point of no return, because corporate's going to take over that process. They're going to export the time to JD Edwards, process your payroll, and funding payroll. Once the time is in JDE, there is no turning it back and say, you know what, I was just kidding. I'm going to go ahead and I want you to send my time over again into JD Edwards from Blueforce. It doesn't work that way. Once we send it over, it's there. Anything that needs to be added, corrected, etc. after the fact now needs to be entered as an interim, or what we're referring to today as a manual timesheet in Blueforce. So as a quick note, once again, the point of return, keep in mind that as submitters and approvers, you have to make sure that everything is correct before you finalize payroll. And I think what happens around the company right now is that a lot of our submitters, a lot of approvers are just going through the motion and just clicking submit, clicking approve, and hoping everything is perfectly fine. So just kind of rolling the dice and going with the flow. And that is actually not the way to do this. We have to be responsible to make sure that all the hours are accounted for. So you know your employees, you know more or less how much time is expected to be out of these accumulated out of these payrolls. And there's also a responsibility to ensure that the employee is punching in and out daily. Now, if they are not punching in and punching out on one of these 4 time collection methods that I mentioned a while ago, then we need to get them towards that. That's going to make our lives easier, our lives as being the submitter and the approver when it comes time to payroll. We don't have to worry about missing anyone in the system. We don't have to go back and add time later, etc. So once approvers approve, they click that little approve link, the export process actually will begin, and it's, like I said, very difficult for that process to be retracted. So corporate payroll will prepare that time, they'll export it over. Once it's initiated, the export process sends your payroll to JD Edwards for processing. And once again, I want to make it clear that Blueforce, ePay, Blueforce program you actually use, is just there for time collection. So everything you see in there from a reporting standpoint, number standpoint, that's all your gross numbers. So that's basically, what the employee actually worked, how many hours they worked, what they got paid at, what's their total rate, total pay, that's it. The rest of the processing goes to JD Edwards, so the JD Edwards then actually goes through and takes out the deductions, takes out any garnishments, applies any other, monetary figures, whatever needs to be done outside of Blueforce, and then at that point, JD Edwards funds your payroll. So actually at that point, it actually goes to a check card, a direct deposit, etc. So any missed time at this point, like I mentioned, it's kind of the after the fact portion of it. Any time now it's missed has to be treated as a manual timesheet in Blueforce. Now, one thing I'll mention a little later in our call today is your manual timesheet is not the same thing as your normal day-to-day timesheet that you see in Blueforce. It's actually a separate link, a separate section. They're kept separate. So it's one thing to keep in mind that you don't just go into the current pay period and enter a manual your missed time. You actually go back to the correct pay period that you actually missed this time for, and actually enter it via this manual timesheet. And I'll explain that in detail a little bit later in our call. So that was just a quick introduction and kind of refresher for everybody on the Blueforce payroll process, so everyone understands kind of all the different moving parts, per se, between Blueforce and JD Edwards. So what are our user expectations in Blueforce? So basically, what's our daily task? What are we supposed to be doing in here kind of on a daily basis? So for everyone on this phone call, kind of our daily user expectations is that we do a daily review of time cards. So right now, we ask that you review your time cards on a daily basis. And this is just to go through and make sure that we take care of any missed punches. We take care of any situations where an employee didn't punch in or maybe didn't punch out, and especially those invalid punch situations where an employee had an issue with a fingerprint or called in from a number that wasn't authorized in the system. So the daily review is critical. We have to be doing the daily review. Now, punch approvals and corrections must be made within the next business day. In reality, we have a 36-hour time frame before the in punch is actually calculated. It's kind of, well, I guess I'm going with that is from the in punch itself plus 36 hours is kind of our guideline as far as doing our punch approvals and any corrections needed to the time record. Now that little phrase there is actually related to our correction lag compliance score. So the question always becomes is how can I guarantee a 4.0 on my compliance score? So I'm going to just go right off a little bit real fast on the Hubble compliance. So the Hubble compliance dashboard, when you see that correction lag, you may see that you have a 4.0 score, you may have a 3, etc. If you do your changes, your punch approvals, which are your invalid punches, you're approving those punches, or any corrections, for example, any missed punches, etc. Those, if they're done within 36 hours, you are guaranteed a 4.0 score. Now, if you wait a little longer than 36 hours to go in there and make any changes, these changes or any other types of changes to that time record, then your correction lag obviously is going to decrease. So everything should be actually, one thing I want to add on this particular bullet point is your allocations. So if you have to allocate that time to a different job, task, work order, that needs to be done also within that 36-hour range. Now, it's a bigger picture here, not just a ePay Blueforce, not a time collection thing, it's not just an ePay team thing. The bigger picture here is that the corrections should be done within 36 hours, or any edits or corrections, need to be done within 36 hours, because we have this thing called a monthly labor forecast that focuses on actual labor versus budgeted amounts, and it actually gives you a good variance as to how you're doing with that particular job at a particular point in time. So if I were to run that report right now, and I notice that it looks like I'm making $500 profit this week on this job, so far this month, let's use on a monthly figure. Let's say I'm making 500 profit so far on this job for this week, for this month, and I don't go in there and actually make my changes on a recurring daily basis like I'm supposed to, or my corrections, and I go in there and finally do make those corrections. That report, the next time I look at it, it's going to be probably showing the opposite side. I might be upside down on my particular job. So it's critical from that perspective that we're actually doing our daily review of our time cards and making our punch approvals and corrections within that next business day. Now, any clock site out there, we can set up, and it's actually strongly suggested that if you have a lead, a supervisor, someone on site, we can set them up as a reviewer role, and the reviewer role allows them to go in on the clock and make any of those punch approvals. And I keep using the word approvals here, and this is not to be mistaken with the approver role. It's two different things. The punch approvals here are just saying that someone had an invalid punch, and someone needs to basically say, yeah, that was a good punch. And anyone, an editor or a submitter or an approver can do that type of punch approval. But all that is just confirming that punch. But from the clock itself, the reviewer role can do that and take some time off of that editor or submitter later from having to do that same role the next business day. So typically what we have is we have a lot of reviewers at these clock sites that actually will take care of this step before they leave the job site at night or at the end of the shift. So that way, that's one less thing that like I said, the editor, submitter, or the approver have to worry about the next day. Now, punch approvals also can be done at clock sites or non-clock sites through Blueforce. If need be, you can make the corrections directly into Blueforce. And that's kind of how most of the group here on the phone call today is handling that. So that's kind of our expectations, is our daily time review, and it has to happen. One thing to keep in mind, if daily reviews are occurring, then there should be no reason for a manual timesheet to be created. Now, one of the things you have to keep in mind is, yeah, we want to get the employee paid, but we want to get them paid the right way the first time, and not having to have to do it, have them wait a couple of days, weeks, months, even at that fact, to get paid. So let's make sure that we are doing our daily reviews. We have everyone accounted for. Time looks good on a daily basis. That way we don't have to get to the point of doing a manual timesheet. So for payroll readiness, and before I go into the actual manual timesheet, let's just talk about a couple of things you can do to be ready for payroll. And when you talk about payroll readiness, it actually involves everybody, the editor, the submitter, and the approver. It even involves the reviewer to the standpoint there at the job site. So one of the things that the question always comes up is, how do I know that my payroll is actually ready to go? What are some things that I can do? So I want to share those couple things, 3 suggestions here for everyone on this phone call. Now, 2 of these suggestions are going to be strictly for the approvers. Now, I would say that also with that, we have the first suggestion, which is timesheets. That's going to be for everyone that's on this phone call, all Blueforce users. One of the things you can do on the timesheet view is you can actually go through and sort that view by timesheet status. So you can kind of see what the status of those timesheets are. If you're doing the daily reviews, then the next step would be obviously is to see if that timesheet got submitted, if that timesheet got approved, and anyone can do that. Anyone can go and look at those different views by timesheet status. As an approver, you can then go also and look at a payroll summary screen, and that's actually going to display the number of employees that are not ready for payroll. And the system, unfortunately, or very fortunately, sorry, will tell you exactly who's ready and who's not. So if you see anyone in the not ready for payroll section, then that should be your key that those people will not get paid and you need to do something about it. And I'll show you these two here momentarily. And obviously the last one, payroll register report, that's going to display all employees and their payroll status by pay group. So you can quickly run that report. You can quickly see what the current status is. Are they ready, not ready as well? What are their total hours? How many total dollars are they expecting, etc. And that's something only the approvers can actually run, just because of the access and the information that is actually displayed on that report. So the first one I mentioned is a timesheet view. The timesheet view is very simple. Everyone has access to see the timesheet view. You go over to the timesheet. You have a variety of different sections that you can look at. But the one thing I want to point out to everybody is the status. And the status is the very first column. I'm going to go ahead and circle it here in orange. And right here in the very first column, you have the ability to see the status of every single timesheet that is out there. So for example, I have one here that says approved, and it's for U.S. Airways hangar. That happens to be that one job in Phoenix that I was looking at. And that's already approved. So I already know that that one's already gone through. We've locked it out all the time. 170 hours is accounted for. That looks good. It's been approved. But you have some other ones at the top that are just an open state. So really what the difference is, if you see an open timesheet, that means that it needs to be submitted next, followed by being approved. So if you ever see an open timesheet in the system, or one that has not been, one that's simply in a submitted state, those are the ones that we need to address because those are not ready for payroll. The second column also shows open punches. Open punches will tell you just that, how many punches are reflected that may require user intervention in order to be corrected. So like the little boxes pointing to an open punch of 1. So that one open punch, if I click on it, it's actually going to take me to that open punch. Now, typically what that open punch can be, it could be a scenario where an employee punched in, didn't punch out, and we never went back and fixed it. So that essentially is reading 0 time. Or maybe someone went in there and manually zeroed out a time card, which what I mean by manually zeroed out a time card, they actually went in there and keyed in the in and out time to be identical. That created an anomaly, which now the system says it's still an open punch because there's no time associated to that. So stuff like that will create an open punch. So those things need to be addressed because, once again, those scenarios will not get paid by the system. Now, the system will let you submit and still let you approve a timesheet with an open punch. So it becomes important that when you go to the screen, you see anything in open punch, that you do address it and go and make that correction before it is submitted and approved. But this also actually breaks out the report. I always call it like a mini report for you because it gives you some other information. It actually shows you here in the middle of the screen your hours broken up by task. If your employees are clocking in and out to the right task, or maybe you yourself are reclassing or maybe allocating the labor to a different task after the fact, the report here would show you that as well. So the timesheet would show it here, sorry. But it's almost like a little mini report that you can actually kind of see a big breakout of what is actually going on in your job site. So you can see, hey, I have 40 hours of custodian work for this one job. Yeah, that's about right. I'm good to go. At least you have a little checkpoint to use as a check sheet here when you go into submit and approve. Now, in all cases, this is driven off of the top of the screen. You have a date range where you can actually go through and tell the system what date range you want to use. Obviously, you want to enter the date range of the pay period that you're looking at. And then obviously at the top right-hand corner, you have 2 nice little export functions. You can now export the view you see here into Excel spreadsheet if you want to review it outside of Blueforce. Export Summary gives you the view just what you see here on the screen. Export Details actually gives you the detail behind each job. So if I want to see all the employees that work that particular job, I can then click on the the job I want to in this timesheet view to actually go into that job detail, or I can just click on Export Details here from the main timesheet view screen, and then from there when I hit Export Details, it'll actually export all the details for me into Excel automatically. So you got some options there, and like I said, this is a good exercise for anyone to go through that's editor, submitter, and or approver. Now I do have a question. I'll just go ahead and address it because it's a good question. It says, should we always be coding overtime as such so that it pays correctly even when the week includes a paid holiday? Let's see. Sorry, this is something we can't always catch within the 36 hours unless we code it as OT move. Well, one of the things to keep in mind is we always want to make sure, obviously, that our time is being coded correctly, and that's bottom line. We want to make sure that we are representing the right job. We want to make sure our labor shows to the right job and to the right work order, and even to the right task for that matter. So get that corrected, regardless if it's 36 hours or not. From the correction lag standpoint, we want it within the 36 hours because it obviously affects other reports. Now, if you use the OT move, what that is saying, it actually will allow you to essentially prioritize that time to be treated as overtime should that employee reach overtime. And now I can't say that I won't recommend you do the other way where you actually code overtime straight throughout, because if you start coding overtime, let's say Saturday's time, Sunday's time, you know that's going to be overtime because the employee's going to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you want that weekend time that happened already to be overtime. So you preemptively go and change the rate type to overtime. The problem that we have with that is what happens if that employee calls in sick. He calls in sick on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. He never hit overtime. However, we forced overtime on that time already. So the system's still going to pay him overtime incorrectly because we told it so by forcing that overtime on that, by changing that rate type. So OT move is the way to go if you want to maybe control overtime in kind of a preemptive strike here. You want to actually go ahead and say this beginning of the week, the Saturday, Sunday time that he or she work is going to be overtime. Change that rate type to OT move. And once again, OT move only works in the event that the employee does indeed accumulate enough to hit that OT rule. So that was a very good question. Thanks for asking. So kind of a quick highlight before we move on to our next piece. Just timesheets, once again, everybody needs to go into this timesheet view anyhow as a submitter and approver. That's the first step. You have to go in here to close your payroll. But filter out this report by job, employees, and other filters as needed. And one thing I will point out to you, let me back up one screen again real quick. Up at the top of the screen here, you do have an ability to see additional filters. So there are a few other additional filters that you can actually filter out the data that's available down throughout the actual timesheet itself. So just keep that in mind. There are other additional filters. We typically don't go into it because they may be of some benefit to some, and some others may not never want to use them, but there are filters in there that you can actually go through and look at. But once again, you can sort this view by the timesheet status. You can go through there and show the statuses of all the different timesheets. You got to make sure everyone's approved, obviously, before payroll process begins. You can see what your open punches are. You can always export this into a quick Excel report as needed. So just some quick highlights on that timesheet view. Now the next one is Payroll Summary screen. This, like I mentioned, is really just for the approvers on this phone call, so everyone else just hold tight here. The approvers can actually go through this Payroll Summary screen, and at the very top of the window, or even on the ePay home screen, you have an icon that looks very similar to this. There's a little $sign on it. It says Payroll. That's the access to your Payroll module, and that's going to give you this Payroll screen. Now in here, as you go through here, you first go into the top of the screen and put in your date range of the pay period. And when you do that, you'll start seeing all these different groupings appear at the bottom of the screen, bottom portion of the screen. Now those groupings are nothing more than like pay groups that are grouped together. So like pay groups that have the same basic rules that are very similar, and essentially not maybe the same rules, but they actually get paid on the same scale or same time frame. and they're grouped together just for your benefit. So you're only going to see your access, the different groupings that are affecting your access level in Blueforce. So if I click on the little plus sign next to the group name, I can expand it. And when I do expand it, it'll look like it's going to look like this here in the middle of the screen. To which now I can actually go through and see all the different pay groups that are part of that. The key thing to keep in mind here is once you expand that grouping, you then have the ability now to actually see more in detail how many employees are ready or not ready as it relates to that particular pay group. So if you look over the far right-hand column, the status column, you'll notice that a few of these statuses have not readies, some say readies, waiting for export and exported. Those are the different phases that the employee's payroll goes through after, as it's beginning, as you go through submitting, approving, and as eventually having corporate payroll exported out to JD Edwards. So looking at the different statuses that are available there, you now have the ability to quickly see which ones are ready and which ones are not. Now, if you just keep focused here on a couple of them, I'm circling here. These that I'm circling say not ready. What that's telling you is, for example, this bottom one, it says not ready for payroll 3. That is telling me that I have 3 employees that are not ready for payroll. And if I were to proceed this process right now and tell corporate payroll to export my time, the batch is going to go off to JD Edwards, but it's going to leave these 3 employees behind. So what happens come paycheck day or the day they get the pay cards funded or direct deposits get hit in the bank, these 3 employees are going to be left behind and they're going to have a paycheck. So we need to make sure make sure there's nobody left in the not ready status. If you need to, you can always, like I said, expand your grouping, go into detail, and then click on that not ready for payroll. And when you do that, it'll actually tell you specifically who are the employees, these 3 employees that are not ready. It'll tell you specifically what is going on with them. So you may see a few of them that are more times than not just simply have not been submitted. And that's more times than not the issue when you see a not ready for payroll. They just haven't been submitted or may not have been approved yet. So as a submitter, as an approver, you can go in here and actually as an approver, you can go in here and look at this update at any point and see, how many more employees am I waiting for before I can actually officially tell payroll that I'm ready to process my full entire payroll. But once the other options here, you'll see await and export. Await and export basically lets you know that those are the number of employees that have been already sent over to JD Edwards and are in process of being transferred. And then lastly, you haven't exported. That's letting you know that's how many actually appeared over in JD Edwards, or were actually officially sent over. So the way it works is if you have 100 ready for payroll, 100 ready for payroll will then actually eventually flow down to 100 and exported. And it should work that way unless you have some weird other situation that pops up along the way. So just a quick highlight of this particular summary screen. Approvers lifeline, and I tell everyone that as an approver, you're the last line of defense. If you go through and say go ahead and process payroll and you have 1 person ready and you have 99 not ready, then 1 person is going to be happy with you, 99 are going to be very upset with you. So this is your lifeline. Follow it, look at it, make sure everyone is ready for payroll. You specify the date range. Light pay groups are going to be grouped together. Summary of hours and dollars by rate type will be available for you here. Summary number by employee shows number of employee not ready for payroll, and then obviously you can always submit all in approval. And one thing I purposely waited to come back here and show you this. If I go back to my previous screen, you'll notice here in the left-hand column of this particular screen, you have these options where you can submit all. You may also have the option there to say approve all. Now, typically, from our training standpoint, we don't instruct you to go this route because this is kind of a more advanced way of doing it in approvals. It's still recommended that you go in, when you submit and approve, you go by the timesheet, go in the timesheet, verify the timesheet, and then submit that route. It does take longer, but it provides you better detail, it provides you a better look, and kind of forces you to go in there and look at everyone's timesheet. So I would recommend you continue submitting time the way you're doing it now. However, as an approver, you may come in here at one point and see that you've got statuses there, and it's actually an action column there, but you can actually go through there and, as an approver, and you go to this approved payroll screen, and if you see it says submit all, that should be your key right there to get on the phone with the submitters and say, hey, y'all aren't doing your job, we need you to go in there and submit. Because the only option you want to see on that far left-hand column is Approve All. And when you see Approve All, that gives you the ability to click on Approve All and actually in one fell swoop approve all of those timesheets related to those groupings into the pay group name. So bottom line, this is the Payroll Summary screen, and that kind of gives you a good picture of what you should be doing with it. And lastly, it's the Payroll Readiness report. The Payroll Register report, sorry. The Payroll Register report is a report that you can run off of that Payroll Summary screen. Off to the far left-hand side, you have a link, and that link shown here is simply the Payroll Register report, which allows you to go through and run a report that's going to give you some detail as to what can I expect to get out of my payroll per se. You know, what employees are getting paid, who's ready, who's not ready, total hours, total dollars, etc. like that. This is a good report to run, and this is a good step for you to make sure that you're doing, because you can now confirm that those amounts are actually correct. So as an approver, you have you're like the last line of defense, like I mentioned. So if you know that it shows one employee on there with 4 hours, and you know that employee was really there for 40 hours, we know off the bat that we have an issue. So you start off by going in, you pick the date range. The date range is going to be of that pay period that you're running the report for. And then when you do that, it's going to pull up all the different pay groups that are available for you to pick from. And they're set up by pay group. So you can go in there and pick, the different pay groups. You may have union pay groups, you may have non-union pay groups. If you want to run them together, you can select them together. If you want to put them separate, you can pick them separately. But the key thing here is once you select those pay groups, you click on Generate Report at the very bottom there. And when you do that, the system is actually going to pull up a nice little report for you. And that report looks very similar to this. It shows you the pay period, shows you the pay group, shows you the payroll number, employee number, etc. Now, the status field is something that I would urge you to keep in mind, pay attention to, because if and let me circle it here. The status field is kind of hidden between my little message boxes there. That status column is going to let you know if that person is ready or not ready for payroll, so you quickly know what the status is. Now, a couple cool other things that I want to point out to everybody is the very last two columns on the very far right. Those last two columns, it's called Export Employee and Is Active, allows you to know if that employee is exportable. What that basically means is we have it set up that all hourly employees in Blueforce are exportable. We have it set up that all salaried employees that come over to Blueforce are not exportable. And the reason we do that is because we give you the ability that if you have to allocate time, or you wanted somebody to actually clock in as a salaried employee to allocate some of their labor to their, to them themselves as part of this process, you can do that in Blueforce. But their time as salaried employees do not go over into JD Edwards, because JD Edwards is set up to obviously pay them at a salary rate. So that's really the difference between the exportable and not exportable, or the yes and no. The other option is a few of you on the phone call, for example, some of our retail division, some of our, and sometimes some of our Midwest group, you have a lot of subs set up in the system. So you may have subcontractors that are using our time collection systems to basically track their time. But once again, they don't get paid out of JD Edwards, so we don't want that time going to JD, so we have them as not to be exported. So in either case, you can check on there. If you see an employee that should be getting paid at JD Edwards, they better have a yes next to their name there in that column. And lastly, as active. Obviously, if they're active employees, they're going to get paid. If they're not active, we may have a problem. So we want to make sure that everyone there is active, is shown as yes. Now, the one thing I will show you is you can always have the ability to come back and run this payroll register report kind of after the fact, meaning that after you've told corporate payroll to run your, that you're done and they start the export process, you always come back in here and run the same payroll register report. And when you do that, it's actually going to fill in that batch ID. Now, it probably doesn't make any difference for you what that batch ID is, because the batch ID is unique to Blueforce. It doesn't have any correlation really into JD Edwards. So that may or may not be a big thing. So this report is something I would urge you to run before and after you tell corporate payroll that you are done. Before, because you can quickly verify and validate all the employees. You can go through, and you also have the ability at the very top to actually go out here and select the format. It means you can export this to Excel or to a CSV file if need be. So you got or a PDF as well. So you can actually have a couple different formats. You can actually export that out and save off your local machine if you need to, etc. So this is kind of your receipt that everything you've done, all the fruits of your labor, from the reviewer, editor, submitter, now the approver, everyone's been accounted for. Now, as you notice there, it does show total pay. So that's why one of the reasons why we leave this only available to the approver in most cases. So just key things, always run this prior to approving. Key step, obviously, status should always read ready for payroll. If they're not ready, then it's not good. Provides you the hours and dollars to be paid, which is obviously the gross pay. Remember, JDE is going to take care of all the garnishments, deductions, etc., and provide the net pay for the employee. Export employee column should be yes, active should be yes, and obviously that report is exportable as needed. Now, those three things, those three little suggestions as far as payroll readiness is what I would recommend that everyone is making sure you're doing on a payroll process basis. Every time you do payroll, make sure you're doing these three steps. Now, one thing I want to just go back to the ePay compliance dashboard for a little bit, because a lot of us have access to that ePay compliance dashboard, and there's a metric on the overview screen that's called interim hours. And you may see the little red. It was green for a while there. Now it's been in the red for quite some time, and it's a little upsetting. But what that little red scale is telling you is that that is the percentage of interim hours for your particular location. This is actually for the company. So as a company right now, we're running a 0.3% interim hours. What that basically means, of all the hours that have been accumulated in Blueforce, 0.3% is being taken care of on an interim basis. So we want to be under a 0.25% on this particular scale. Interim hours currently is not part of our compliance score. It's just a different graphic, a different metric that's available for you to see where you're at as far as interims. But this is not a good thing, because if the greater the interims number is, chances are the worse off we are with manual time and all that good stuff over on the Blueforce compliance metric. So keep that in mind. We want to keep this very low, lower than this, especially lower than 0.25%. Now, as I mentioned, we also have this variance over in the monthly labor forecast. And this variance right now, let's say if this is your site, if this is your company or your area, and you pull this up and it looks like you're making $167,000 profit this month, and you're like, wow, I'm doing phenomenal. This is awesome. I'm making sure everyone's clocking in. I'm doing this and doing that. But if you're not doing your daily reviews, and when I go and make those changes, or not changes, those corrections to my missed punches or invalid punches, this number is going to go down. So when you look at this, not doing those daily reviews, it's always going to lead to misstated revenue. So keep that in mind, that I can't stress enough, we need to be doing our daily time reviews. Alrighty, so kind of that brings me to the big question, and the main focus of today's call is, how do I handle payroll adjustments? So my interim number is bad. I know I'm not doing my daily time reviews, which I should be doing. I'm not going to do it going forward, but I have to pay someone today, this week, some adjustments, because I missed them in the payroll. So how do I take care of that? Well, like I mentioned earlier, the key word here is manual timesheet. It's called a manual timesheet because you're actually manually going in there and keying in any time, any hours, etc., that are missed for this employee. Now, the manual timesheets are what I refer to as dumb timesheets, because they don't look at any of the rules or any calculations or any of the setup we have in the system. If you are due an employee 8 hours at $10 an hour for a total of $80, then you're going to go in the system and key in 8 hours. The system is going to automatically pull up $10 hour pay rates and then calculate $80. If that employee was due a shift differential as part of that, then you'd have to calculate that manually and enter it as part of the manual timesheet. So once again, it's a little bit more work now, because now you have to go in there and tell the system exactly what it needs to pay the employee. But it's called a manual timesheet more so because we're going to go back and we're actually going to make sure that we enter it to the proper pay period. So if it happened two pay periods ago, we're going to go back to that two pay period date that they actually worked and actually enter that time on that particular date. All right, so how do I handle these adjustments? All adjustments are going to be handled using this manual timesheet process. And this is basically any interim check situation. So any situation where you have unpaid hours. It doesn't matter if it's vacation pay, PTO pay, holiday pay, work pay, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's some type of pay due back to the employee, we have to go in through the manual timesheet. These are handled separately from your regular timesheet. Manuals will never show up alongside regulars, and that's something to keep in mind because you typically think, oh, I enter my time, I'm done. I don't see it in there, but I know it's in there. It's going to go through when I submit and approve it. You got to pay attention that there are separate sections for manual and your regular timesheet. You have the ability as a Blueforce editor, submitter, approver to go in there and enter up to 2 prior pay periods. If it's a greater than this time, Blueforce will pretty much allow you to do that now, but it's a good thing to maybe just drop a note to corporate payroll and let them know that you've entered something for longer than that period. The biggest mistake here of doing the manual timesheet is that you submit and approve a timesheet before all other interim situations are compiled. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say back on February the 20th, I had to enter some time because I missed an employee who worked 8 hours that day. Well, I go through, I enter that manual timesheet, I go ahead and submit it, I approve it, I have someone else approve it, and I'm done, right? Well, then another employee comes up and says, on the 20th, I missed 8 hours for them as well. And then another employee comes up and says, you missed my 8 hours on that day as well. Suddenly I have an epidemic going on because now I missed everybody on the 20th. However, I've already submitted and approved that timesheet. So now you're kind of stuck up a creek. So what you're going to have to do is keep in mind that you can only submit and approve a timesheet for that specific interim situation one time. So we want to make sure that you compile all the different scenarios and then submit it and approve it. And I'll go through that here momentarily. All right, so how do you handle the payroll adjustment? So if it's a current period situation and the payroll has not been approved yet, and that is the key, the approver hasn't gone in there and approved anything. If it's a current pay period and has not yet been approved and there is no need to create a manual timesheet for any hours that reflect the dates within the open period. So what that means is if the open period right now is January 2nd through January the 8th, let's say that's the actual current period, and the employee has 16 vacation hours due to them on January 4th and 5th. Well, as long as they haven't approved yet and corporate payroll hasn't started the export process, then yeah, you go ahead and go back in there, let's get that timesheet reopened if it's already been submitted, and then go in there and key in the time to the current pay period. There's no need to do an extra step here. Remember, we want to stay away from those interim scenarios. So current pay period, please use the same current pay period and proceed. Now, if that payroll has already been approved, well then there's no other way to take care of that other than doing a manual timesheet. If the period has already been closed, for example, the period is already January 2nd through 8th and it's been closed, and you have those same 16 hours due on the 4th and 5th, then you have to go and create that manual timesheet. Now, keep in mind, this is the only way the employee gets the hours due to them. That means do not contact your corporate payroll contact and beg and plead them to go ahead and enter that for them or you through JD Edwards. Now, it's important that all hours go through Blueforce. If it's an interim, then so be it. Enter it through a manual timesheet and have it go through Blueforce. Once again, going back to that variance number I showed you earlier, if we are doing any hours, any way, shape, form outside of Blueforce, then all those monthly labor forecast reporting means nothing. So keep in mind that if we want accurate reporting, we have to do everything in Blueforce. Now, I'm not saying that there are other avenues to get time in there, but I do know that many times we hear that some users do not want to create a manual timesheet. They'd rather just have corporate payroll try to help them out on the back end, which is incorrect. So please, do not contact your corporate payroll contact to help them. They will force you now to go through and enter a manual timesheet for any time. Now, JDU Security for everyone else has also been adjusted, so no one can go in here and automatically do any time entry. I left this slide. It's kind of an old process that we kind of changed probably over a year ago, but we used to have a lot of our team here on the phone call actually had access to JD Edwards and actually had access to the time entry screen in JD Edwards. I'm sorry. So that gave the ability to go through and make adjustments, changes, key directly into JDE, which is not something we want to do anymore. So everyone on this phone call, if you have JDE access, you do not have access to the time entry screens anymore. So you have to create a manual timesheet in Blueforce. Once again, this is the only way to make sure that the employee gets the hours that are due to them. All right, so how do I create this manual timesheet? I've been talking about it quite a bit, so let's get to it. How do I create that manual timesheet? So everybody, on the actual opening home screen of the Blueforce, you're going to go into Timesheets. And from Timesheets, you're going to actually go in, and you can actually access out the top ribbon in Blueforce as well. But Timesheets will actually take you into the Timesheets window. And by default, the window that you see that pops up is always going to be your regular job timesheet screen. So everything I see over here while I'm doing little scribbles, that is always going to be your job timesheets option. That's by default the way the system pops up. So you'll always go straight to job timesheets. Now, if you need to go into manual timesheet, then you're going to click on the manual timesheet link that's located at the bottom of that list. Now, purposely, it was placed at the very bottom of the list away from the regular, so that way there will be no confusion. So manual timesheet is only going to be used, once again, whenever you have a situation where you owe an employee hours that were not paid, any back pay, bottom line, hours you were missed in the regular payroll process. So once you click on manual timesheet, you'll then be able to go in and actually proceed by being prompted here with a little manual timesheet screen. And the first thing we do is we actually go in there and choose the timesheet we want to use. So keep in mind, when we go in here, we're going to first pick the job that we want to actually enter a manual timesheet for. We're then going to go in and pick the date range that we want to enter this timesheet for. If it's just for one day, then just pick one day up there. If it's for a series of dates, then go ahead and put a series of dates up there. But just keep focused on that date range, because the system is going to pop up all the different timesheets that are available for that particular date range. So you'll see that here momentarily. And that's point 2 and 3 up there. Now in bullet 4 there, you'll see show blank timesheets. Now the reason I always get a question here is, why do we care about blank timesheets? We're trying to enter time back on I know I entered time back on February, or in this case January the 2nd, so there should be a timesheet in the system, correct? Well, that is correct. However, we're talking about manual timesheets. Manual timesheets are separate from your regular timesheets. So I can almost guarantee that you don't have a timesheet in the system for January the 2nd. So in this case, we want to tell the system to show you the blank timesheet that's there. And the blank timesheet is set up there so you can actually add to it. So blank timesheets is the way we want to go all the time. And then lastly, we're going to click on search. When we click on search, the system will return all the different timesheets that met your criteria from your search bar at the very top of the screen. In this case, I'll have 2 different timesheets that appeared up for me, both being for Alamo Cafe, which is my job 105 there. But you'll notice that I have one for the pay period of 12/25 through January the 2nd, and you have another one from January 3rd through January 9th. Well, the question I always get is, well, why did I get 2 timesheets? I only want to enter time for one, right? Well, my date criteria at the very top of the screen shows January 2nd through January 8th. That criteria crosses over 2 different pay weeks, or in this case, pay periods, sorry. So in that case, I have 2 different manual blank timesheets that appeared for me. So keep in mind, you always want to verify that the correct timesheet is the one that you select is the one you actually are going to need. And if you need to be to create enter time in both timesheets, that's perfectly fine. But you can only enter time for that specific pay period as noted on that timesheet. So what you're going to do is, once you actually pick that timesheet you want to use, it's going to take you to another screen where you now click on Add New. And when you click on Add New, the system will then allow you to now key in the actual time that was missed. So it's just kind of like a 10-step process here per se, 10 different fields. But step 1, field 1 is you enter the work date. Basically, what is the day that the employee was supposed to have worked? What day was the time that we actually failed to pay him for? Next, what job? And the kind of cool thing here, or maybe it makes a little trick the system wants to pull on you, but the system is kind of testing you to see, hey, what job are you going to pick here? Because that job better match that job that you already told it a little while ago. Because if it doesn't, then we're going to have a little, we're going to have some words, whether you pay here in a little bit. So make sure that those two jobs are in sync. Next, the employee, pick the employee. Next, pick the task the employee worked. If there's a work order, you have the ability to put the work order there. And obviously from a labor forecast standpoint, we want to make sure we pick the correct work order if there is one. And then the past pay date. And this is kind of a date field that we always get questions about, and it's just kind of a unique field. What I tell everyone is go in there and just make it the start date of the pay period you missed hours for. That's kind of the way to go. But bottom line, the system just wants a date range anywhere within that pay period. And the reason I say that anywhere within that pay period is because you may go and put, like the example shows here, 12/27/15, and then you may enter another line, and 12/27/15 may be fine. You go away from this, come back to it, and then you try to enter 12/27/15 again in that third line you're creating, and the system screams at you, gives you an error. If you change it just to simply 28th or 29th, another date within that particular range of this particular pay period, the system will accept your line. So past payday is just a date any time within that pay period. And then lastly, step 7 here is your rate type. Make sure you put the right rate type. Step 8, number of hours the employee is due for that particular day worked. Keep in mind, if you put in the 20th and he only worked 8 hours, then only put 8 hours. Do not put 50 hours on one day, because first off, the system will not allow 50 hours to be entered for one day. But secondly, if you put in the incorrect amount of hours, it goes back to that labor forecast and all that other reporting I talked about a while ago, it'll misstate all that information. So just keep that in mind. And then rate. If there is a rate specific for this particular task or job that's due to this employee, you can go ahead and key it in here. Otherwise, system will pull in his or her default rate. So I always typically say leave this blank unless you have to pull something in there. Now, as I mentioned, if there's a shift differential involved, or maybe you have to add 25 cents an hour to the employee because of the time frame he worked, then you can go ahead and edit the rate here. That's probably a good example for that. The other fields there, leave it alone. Don't worry about those. At this point, you can then now go to the far left-hand side of that particular pay line, hit save, and the system will give you a confirmation message letting you know that you have added that time successfully. Now, if you don't see that successful message, that means you did not do that. Make sure you hit save and not cancel. Too many times we do that, and it erases our work, and then we think it's done, and lo and behold, it's not done. So keep that in mind. We have some confirmation messages available for you. Now, if you need to enter additional manual timesheets, then you just go back, click on Add New again, right above that first line, and same process again. If you ever need to go back and edit or delete an existing timesheet, maybe you go and realize, oh, this guy really did get paid, I didn't need to enter it, this manual timesheet, I can always delete it and get it, just remove it from existence altogether. Now, once you've entered this manual timesheet, it is critical that you go through and submit and approve. That is the next step, because if you don't submit and approve, it's just going to be sitting out there and nothing's going to happen. So you need to submit and approve. So in order to do that, you have a payroll screen that you can go to again. It's called Manual Payroll Summary. And if you're a submitter, you can submit from the manual timesheet itself. But as I mentioned earlier, I showed this payroll summary screen earlier, and we focus on the first link at the very top of the screen, which also have a link further towards the bottom called Manual Payroll Summary, to which the person who's maybe approving at this point can go through the Manual Payroll Summary, go through, and at this point, enter the date range, hit search, and then you kind of see the status of where that particular timesheet is. So you can actually go through and see if it's on open state, if it's been submitted, if it needs any changes, it's been approved, it's been exported, etc. So you have this particular view that's available for you that you can actually, it's a little different from the normal view that you're accustomed to, but at least you have a kind of an inkling as to what's going on with that particular timesheet. Was it entered, and what is the status of it? The approver will then need to approve everything, obviously. If needed, the approver can always reject any submitted timesheet. So keep that in mind, that you always have that in your back pocket if you need to. And all that rejection is there is maybe the submitter forgot something or needs to go back and make some changes or further additions. If you reject the submitted timesheet, you then can go in as an approver, go in there and reopen that timesheet for the submitter. The submitter will go in there and make the changes. Then they'll have to submit that timesheet again, and then you'll come back in as an approver and approve it. And this is like a quick picture of the reopen option. Reopen all is available down there as well. So once you've entered that timesheet, obviously we've already made sure that we've submitted and approved it. The next thing is probably the most important step of everything, and that is to contact your corporate payroll contact via email and notify them that you have a manual timesheet in the queue. It is important because they, from a corporate payroll standpoint, they do not go and look and see if there are any manual timesheets out there. But since I mentioned in the beginning, I've said a couple different times, the regular timesheets are separate from the manual timesheets. So it's important, and it's on you to go in there and let them know that there is a manual timesheet out there in the queue. Now the way this works, and unless something's changed in recent time here, corporate payroll requires that by 2 p.m. Central Time that you actually have that manual timesheet ready and in queue. And they may also ask you for a special paycheck request form just to document that you've requested this interim check to be run. All this has to be to them by 2 p.m. Central. That way you can ensure that you get that check run done and funded that same day. If not, it's going to wait till the next business day. So keep that in mind. You must contact your corporate payroll contact. So kind of to wrap up, just want to make sure that we all understand that if daily reviews are occurring, that's stressed that many times, there should be no reason to have a manual timesheet created. Now, utilizing Blueforce's functionality to help with shift differentials, holiday exceptions, etc., to prevent having to track info manually is a big benefit here. And what I mean by that line is, more times than not, a lot of the interims are because we forget to put a shift differential in, or maybe there was a holiday rule and someone got paid differently on the holiday. So we can utilize Blueforce's setups to actually take care of this for us automatically. So if you have any situations out there where you have a shift differential, a holiday exception, any specific type of union rule maybe, please reach out to either myself or Tiandra or Beth or Jade, and one of us, as far as any member here on the ePay team, can assist you with getting that set up in Blueforce. So just to wrap up our call, as I do every week, I just want to stress that we are available to assist you. We just ask you to go through via help desk tickets, or you can always call the help desk phone number, and the help desk ticket will be created for you. And if you have any other support questions, obviously you can always go through those methods there. So in wrapping, I want to say thank you for joining me today for our Manual Timesheets webinar. We'll have a new topic next week on Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central as a continuance of our Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series webinars. Until next week, we'll talk to you again real soon. Thank you so much for joining us.